Liv Ivanov. I'm an associate agent at Creative Media Agency, and I've always had a huge passion for storytelling ever since my neighbor got me into writing back in 2010. And so since then, I've just loved writing as a hobby, storytelling in general, and obviously reading voraciously. I'm looking for fast-paced plots that are constantly increasing that tension and constantly drawing the reader in and really want making them want to continue the book and possibly finish it in a single setting.
Almost to make the book addictive.
Yes, these would be addictive for sure. Especially whenever it feels symmetrical. As readers and as people, we love symmetry. And so for us, stories feel more compelling, impactful, and just they affect us more emotionally when we feel like the story's coming around to kind of the same point where it started at, but with a different and hopefully better resolution than what the character started off as. And so that's why when it comes to the plot, having plots that, have that first and last out formula with the plot that, you introduce first, the problem you introduce first, that gets solved last. That can be super helpful for just helping the reader feel like the story is ending in the correct way. It's satisfying and has the biggest impact on the reader. I do like the mice quotient, and mice stands for milieu, idea, character, and event. And so these are the different types of problems that a character normally has throughout the story. Whether they're stuck in a room, that'd be like a milieu event. They're trying to figure out who murdered their friend. That would be the idea. Character, that is the internal problems that they're dealing with. They want to overcome maybe their social anxiety, maybe they have an insecurity that they want to get over. And then event would be an earthquake rocks their world. And so, what's important for the story, I think, and it's not always this way. I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule. I think every story is different. But for the mice quotient, you want whatever the first problem is to be the last problem the characters solve. And so if there's an earthquake and the character is insecure about their friendship with a friend that they get locked in a room with, you want to make sure they get out of the room, they resolve their issues with their friends, and then that earthquake comes to an end. I think that will really help the reader feel like the story has come to that satisfying end.
Well, it sounds to me as if that's a way of finding the mix of the different things that make living on this planet intense and throwing them all together. And then you have a real
Yeah.
story, right?
Yeah, you don't want just one plot line. You wanna have what the character is going through, and you wanna have the external problems that they're dealing with, and when it gets all thrown together, it's messy, but that's what life is like, and so we want the characters' problems messy. We want them how they're solving the problems to be messy. But at the end, they're going through a journey that will hopefully resonate with some of your readers, and make them eager to invest maybe into more of your stories or just find a character that they really identify with and that they can stand behind. One thing I've noticed with fantasy is what's getting a lot of more people into it, and I think is what going to engage readers faster is that faster pacing. And so a lot of older fantasy takes quite a while to kind of get into the action, into the exciting incident. There's the walls of exposition and really old, like 1980s fantasy. But now we're getting into the inciting incident in chapter one, chapter two, chapter three. And so I think having a fast paced opening can really help your story.
Okay, I have an impossible math question for you. Just if you had to wager a wild guess, what percentage of the manuscripts you see are too slow and which ones are too fast in terms of pacing?
I'd say that like probably 40 to 60% of the books that whenever the stories and projects that I'm reading, whenever I do end up having to pass on them, it is the fact that it feels a bit of a slow opening. I feel that even if you don't have the inciting incident in the first chapter, which I don't think you always need to have that, I feel like too quickly can also be to your detriment. I do think that not putting so much exposition, info dumping, telling a lot of having a lot of that in the opening chapters is ultimately, I think, what will kind of take readers out of the story. And so that's why even if you might be introducing a few aspects of your story that are a little confusing and that do need exposition, that's why I do think it's better to wait maybe a chapter or two later for a more natural place to put that in there. The reader, they're going to be engaged by the tension, by the voice, by the characters, and they're kind of going into a story knowing that they're not going to know everything right away. And so that's why it's important to disseminate and kind of spread out that exposition. And if anything, a lot of times that information can hold tension in itself. And so holding that off to explain till later can also be to a benefit.
Would you say there's an inverse relationship between tension and pacing? So, say, for example, the tension is really high, the pacing can be slow. If the tension is lower, the pacing has to be faster.
I wouldn't say it's always an inverse relationship. I do think that there are points in a story where you want to have a little bit of a slower pacing because a lot of the story is about the character development. For me, I really like character-driven stories, and so you need those moments where it might not be tension in the external tension, but it might be an emotional tension. And so that could get raised really high while the pacing is a little bit slower. But as far as external tension, I do think it's not always inversely related, but I do think that either having fast pacing or a lot of tension, one of those two is important to have for the most part during your book in order to keep readers engaged. And for the parts where that's not needed, having that character development, I think, is equally as important.